Welcome, brothers and sisters, to the Meher Baba program. I'm Fred Stankus, along with Suhas Ginde, suffering from a little laryngitis, as you could probably hear. So, Suhas, I'd like you to introduce the show. It's on discourses, kind of individual. Why don't we start from there?
Thank you, Fred. I hope you get better.
Well, I feel good. It's just the laryngitis.
All right. Today we're going to talk about a chapter from Discourses that were given by Meher Baba during the 1920s through the 30s till about the 40s. And this is a chapter that I wanted to talk about on God and the individual. So the first chapter, and I'm going to read a little bit of the captions before I get into the chapter, the side captions. God is the only reality. So Baba basically says God is infinite. He is beyond the opposites of good and bad, right and wrong, virtue and vice, birth and death, pleasure and suffering. Such dual aspects do not belong to God. If you take God as one separate entity, he becomes one term in relational existence. Just as good is the counterpart of bad, God becomes the counterpart of not God. And the infinite comes to be looked upon as the opposite of the finite. When you talk of the infinite and the finite, you're referring to them as two. And the infinite has already become the second part of the duality. But the infinite belongs to the non-dual order of being. If the infinite is looked upon as the counterpart of the finite, it is strictly speaking no longer infinite, but a species of the finite. For it stands outside the finite as its opposite and is thus limited. Since the infinite cannot be the second part of the finite, the apparent existence of the finite is false. The infinite alone exists. God cannot be brought down to the domain of duality. The infinite alone exists. There is only one being in reality, and it is the universal soul with a capital S. The existence of the finite or the limited is only apparent or imaginary. Apparent existence of the finite. You are infinite. You are really everywhere. But you think that you are the body, and therefore consider yourself limited. If you think you are the body which is sitting right here, you do not know your true nature. If you were to look within and experience your own soul in its true nature, you would realize that you are infinite and beyond all creation. However, you identify yourself with the body. The false identification is due to ignorance, which makes itself effective through the medium of the mind. An ordinary person thinks that he is the physical body. A spiritual advanced individual thinks that he is the subtle body. The saint thinks that he is the mind. But in none of them is the soul having direct self-knowledge, or knowledge of the self with a capital S. It is not a case of pure thinking unmixed with illusion. The soul, as soul, is infinite, aloof from mind or body, yet owing to ignorance, the soul comes under the sway of the mind and becomes a thinker, sometimes identifying itself with the body and sometimes with the mind. From the limited point of view, a person who has not gone beyond the domain of Maya, there are numberless individuals. It seems that there are as many individuals as there are minds and bodies. In fact, there's only one universal soul. But the individual thinks that he is different from other individuals. The one and the same soul is ultimately behind the minds of seemingly different individuals. And through them, it has the multifarious experiences of duality. The one in the many comes to experience itself as one of the many. This is due to imagination or false thinking.
So, in regards to an individual then, our mind is what gives us our separativeness of each other. If you didn't think, would you be realizing reality? Because our thinking makes us believe what we are, okay? If your mind stops, then you would see your reality. In other words, people think and identify themselves with their mind. They think, I am Fred because my experiences have denoted through my life, I'm Fred. If I stop my mind, of course people may say, well, that man is insane or mad.
Not necessarily.
But I'm just saying from the point of view of the world. The idea of it is though, but the key to God enlightenment or realization or advancement is stopping the mind.
Yes, but in stopping the mind, you may be able to see God.
I see.
Quieting the mind, it's one of the techniques they give in meditation.
But you see, most people don't realize, like what Baba is saying in this discourse, they think they're the mind. Most people out there in viewerland or in the world consider the mind as them. My mind, what I've learned is me. But Baba says no.
That's the ego mind.
But how come a person has that ability then to use the mind and grasp the things? But he really isn't that, is he? Maybe he's like a computer that is built with a mainframe power and the program. But somebody built it, and it's the same thing with us. We've been created by something, and that energy has created the body, the mind, and the mental capacity to use it. So we really are not those things. We're beyond those, but we use them and take possession of them as we think they are.
Because we identify with our bodies, our minds, and our environment. And we take that to be real. We take God to be imaginary.
So what we're sharing, I never hear this in the mainstream. Nobody talks about you and your mind as not being you. I mean, you watch any kind of show on TV or newscasts.
Yeah, but this is an Eastern philosophy.
But what I'm trying to say,
They will
though...
not talk about it here in this part of the world.
Oh, it's not in the West. And so you're saying the Christian dogma doesn't talk about that.
The Judeo-Christian concept of God, the individual, is not what Baba's talking about. He's been influenced by Vedanta, a little bit of Sufism. Sufism is the influence of Hinduism on Islam. So there's a little bit because of what he was taught by his master. So this is a little bit alien or different to our normal thinking in this part of the world. You do hear about it in some alternative, how would I say it?
Circles.
There are circles and there are teachers who have brought some of the Eastern concepts of Hinduism, Buddhism, and others from the East, Chinese thinking, Lao Tzu. They've introduced it in some parts of this country, of this part of the world. So this is not something that would be easy for people to understand.
And the thing is, and when you're a young person, you have the seeds of desire in your life. You want to achieve, you want to marry, you want to meet that beautiful girl, you want to have a great education, you want to have good times, you want to have success in your career. And so when you would tell that to a young person about their mind, and they would say, are you kidding me? I am what my mind is. My mind gives me the right to be me. So that's why I remember our last program we talked about where Milarepa told the young lady who came to him.
That's Buddhism.
Yeah, wanting to be a disciple. She was young and beautiful, 20 years old, 21. And he told her, listen, you're a beautiful girl. Why do you want to become a monk? or sister, why don't you go to the world? And she says, I want to give it up. And so he put her through test. Of course, she passed and stayed with him. But the idea of it is, it's very rare a young person would be interested in giving up their mind.
No, and the Western world also is devoted to the rational mind. They talk about universal mind also in the East, universal body, universal mind. And these are people who have achieved that. But beyond the mind, what Baba says, there's a beyond. See, up till when I was in college, that's what I thought, the universal mind. The God that we talk about is the God of our mental creation. It's the God, and the opposite of it is, as you called it, the devil or evil. But then Baba talks about there's a state called beyond God. This is where which I had not encountered before in my readings. And then there's a beyond God state in which God is unconscious of anything. It's like in a state of sound sleep. So this is a subject matter that has not been discussed openly. We're talking about it now. Some smaller groups may have discussed this, but this is also mentioned in God Speaks about the way the universe evolved.
Also, the point of it is to remember, too, when one gives up his physical mind, it's great bliss he experiences. Mm-hmm. It's non-ending, perennial knowledge, power and bliss, when you experience the true reality of who you are. So when people say, well, why would one surrender himself, the idea of it is to understand you become one with God, and you're conscious of it. I mean, and the fact is, it's not just, it's an eternal experience. So the point of it is, that comes gradually through births and deaths, according to Meher Baba, 8,400,000 human births and deaths before one automatically, you could say, or naturally, goes to a state to where they end up surrendering themselves. So souls going through life, they can't just do it at a whim, like what we're talking about.
But at the same time, we are living this life consciously. We are unconscious of our previous existence, and we're not aware of what will come. We don't have that prescience or that ability to see in the future or in the past. A realized being does. He has closed the bridge between time. So past, present, and future are all merged into the now. So he's able to look behind, he's able to look ahead. And he sees all the different lifetimes and so on, the people that come in contact with him, he's able to see that. We are not able to see that because our vision is then limited. We can only experience what we are going through now in our lifetimes, which means we are caught up with the mind, we're caught up with the body, we're caught up with our environment. So we go to work, we sustain ourselves, and we, as you said, we go through life, we get married, have children, so on. And then we die, and then we are reincarnated in some other family. But we are not aware of where we're going to be born again and where we were in the previous life. We just bring those characters.
You remind me of another thing. It doesn't matter what religion or what path you're following, we're all destined for the same place, and that is eventually we'll all die, and then we're reincarnated again. So religions and these organized type of structures of dogmas are just for the play of life, for the earth, or whatever experience it may be.
They're also really created by the mind.
They're created by the mind. God is beyond religion, anybody's religion. People sometimes put the flagpole in their soil of saying, this is our God, and he is the one. But really, he's beyond religion. If God was to be labeled as a religion, how limited he'd be.
I think religions are ways to worship
right.
God.
But a lot of paths in this world, Christian especially, they always say this is the way, you know.
They've narrowed their religion
exactly.
and limited their
And it's basically, what's the
approach to
word?
God.
It's like children fighting with toys over which religion is correct.
Yeah, my God over your
Right.
God.
I mean, why can't a brave man reach out his hand in love to his enemy? And that's true courage over this, whatever happens in the world. So anyway, let's continue on with this.
Okay, so Baba goes on and says, cause of false thinking. Thinking becomes false because of the interference of sanskaras, or impressions, accumulated during the process of the evolution of consciousness. The function of consciousness is perverted by the operation of sanskaras, which manifest themselves as desires. Though through many lives, consciousness is continually being burdened by the after effects of experience. The perception of the soul is limited by these after effects. The thinking of the soul cannot break through the hedge created by sanskaras, and consciousness becomes a helpless captive of illusions projected by its own false thinking. This falsification of thought is present not only in cases where consciousness is partly developed, but also in man where it is fully developed. The progressive evolution of consciousness from the stone stage culminates in man. Baba has talked about the different paths of evolution. The history of evolution is the history of a gradual development of consciousness. The fruit of evolution is full consciousness, which is characteristic of man. But even this full consciousness is like a mirror covered by dust. Owing to the operation of sanskaras, it does not yield clear and true knowledge of the nature of the soul. So the consciousness is clouded as a mirror by dust. The dust are like the sanskaras or impression that cover the mind, which lead to desires.
So you can't see it clearly.
You cannot see God. You cannot see the reality. You still haven't realized.
The dust is all the lifetimes you've had and all the experiences, impressions. So that separates you from seeing yourself.
From seeing the God within
God
or
within.
the external. See, that's the mirror. When the dust is removed, and that can only be done by the grace of the Master. Though fully developed, it yields not truth, but imaginative construction, since its free functioning is hindered by the weight of the sanskaras, free functioning of the mind. Moreover, it cannot extend beyond the cage created by its desires, and therefore is limited in its scope.
This is a very important sentence you just finished. Is it the weight of the impressions on the mind? Meaning, there's so many impressions from experiences, from experiences of one life or another life, that it's impossible for that soul to even feel he can be free to pursue what we're talking about. I mean, because your mind is so active.
It's loaded.
It's so loaded. In fact,
these sanskaras.
I think if you do not learn how to maybe quiet the mind down 5 minutes a week, they say sometimes you can go mad in this world because you move so fast. But anyway, that is an amazing thing what Baba says, that the mind is loaded. Huh?
And it creates a barrier or a cage. By its desires, therefore, is limited in its scope. The consciousness gets limited. Individualization of consciousness. The boundary in which consciousness can move is prescribed by the sanskaras.
By the impressions.
By the impression.
The boundary. Less impressions, you have more freedom.
Yeah.
More, you don't. You're like in a corral, just totally.
Well, the less impression person may be a higher evolved soul.
Oh, it's just like they say in unconditional love. In unconditional love, you give freedom to the one you love, versus conditional love, which you
binds you.
Binds.
We are bound by our sanskaras. And functioning of consciousness is also determined by the desires. The boundary can move as prescribed by the sanskaras. The functioning of consciousness is also determined by the desires. As desires aim at self-satisfaction, the whole consciousness becomes self-centered and individualized. So there it is.
What?
As desires aim at self-satisfaction,
Okay.
they have to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
The whole of consciousness becomes self-centered and individualized. That's how you start identifying with who you are, the external you, not the internal you.
Oh, I see. I've got things to do. I've got education to meet. I've got a career. I've got romance.
I got to get busy.
Yeah.
I got things
In
to
other
do.
words, that
places
is
to go.
that individual I.
Because of the desires which come from the sanskaras.
Yeah.
You follow?
Yeah. So this is a very, very key point in one's life. When
That's how we come
when
to
that
identify.
That kicks in.
That's how we come to identify with the mind,
Right.
the body, the environment.
And if once a person gets going with that mode of operandi, it's tough to change him to say, okay,
You have to go off on a tangent, or you have to come in contact with somebody who has transcended to another level. He's gotten out of that merry-go-round. See? And then he says the individualization of consciousness may, in a sense, be said to be the effect of the vortex of desires. The soul gets enmeshed in the desires and cannot step out of the circumscribed individuality constituted by these desires. So the desires form your outer you, what you're identifying with. It imagines these barriers and becomes self-hypnotized. It looks upon itself as being limited and separate from other individuals. It gets entangled in individualistic existence and imagines a world of manifold separateness, composed of many individuals with their respective minds and bodies. So it gets entangled in individualistic existence, identifying with the external, and imagines a world of manifold separateness composed of many individuals with their respective minds and bodies.
so that's the way we look at the world.
Yeah.
You wake up, you say, wow, it's a tough world out there.
How many
I
individuals?
got to get on the freeway.
Yes.
I got to handle all the individuals out
all
there.
separate.
They're all
from each
separate.
other. Yeah.
But you're in the rat race now. Now you're moving.
Yeah.
Now you can't get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
You're there. It takes an extremely, what's the word, rare soul to be able to.
Yeah. And then he goes on and says, separateness exists only in imagination. What we take to be real is really imagination. So, when the rays of the sun are made to pass through a prism,
Yeah.
they get dispersed and become separate because of the refraction. You know, you've seen experiment.
They look like rainbow coming through.
7 colors. If each of these rays had consciousness, it would consider itself as being separate from the others. Other rays, forgetting entirely that at the source and on the other side of the prism, it had no separate existence. So the one light divides itself by being refracted through a glass to 7 or 8 rays, 7 or more rays. In the same way, the one being descends into the domain of Maya, or the principle of illusion, and assumes a multiplicity that does not in fact exist. The separateness of individuals does not exist in reality, but only in imagination. The one universal soul, with a capital S, imagines separateness in itself, and out of this division there arises the thought of I and mine, as opposed to you and yours. Although the soul is in reality an undivided and absolute unity, it appears as being manifold and divided owing to the working of its own imagination. Imagination is not a reality. Even in its highest flight, it is a departure from truth. It is anything but the truth. The experience the soul gathers in terms of the individualized ego is all imagination. It is a misapprehension of the soul. Out of the imagination of the universal soul are born many individuals. This is Maya or ignorance. This is the power behind creation.
So we're talking about some unbelievable lofty consciousness here Baba's giving.
But it is why we feel and experience ourselves as separate individuals and not one. We're one at the highest level, but we seem to be separate and divided in our thinking, the way we go about our daily life, each one doing his own.
So it's very rare when a human being can become connected with others, losing himself, but yet still being a human. I guess that's called sainthood, when a person cannot see or project his own ego on people. You follow what I'm saying? He almost encompasses a person and holds them as though it's him or her.
He sees himself in that person and also that person within.
I guess that's what sainthood is. Sainthood is
he
when
sees the oneness.
When you're still a human, but you lost your ego. You're totally egoless.
Yeah.
You see the same divinity in each being, which is probably, like you said, one in a million.
But that's what Baba had said, that it takes 1 in a million soul to step away from this rat race, the merry-go-round, as you say, and to get on and to search for a different way out of this madness.
We're getting the wrap-up sign almost now, Suhas. So